why would we pay $200 billion a year in subsidies to Canada when they're not a state? You do that for a state, but you don't do that for somebody else's country.
The United States and Canada share the world's longest international border and one of history's most integrated economic relationships. But recent changes in trade policy have created significant economic impacts on both sides of the border. Today, we're analyzing the economics of U.S.-Canada trade relations, examining how tariff policies affect energy markets, manufacturing supply chains, and consumer prices. This is an educational look at trade economics and bilateral relationships. To understand current trade dynamics, we need to establish the foundation of U.S.-Canada economic integration. According to the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, bilateral trade between the United States and Canada totaled approximately $773 billion in 2023, making Canada America's largest trading partner. This relationship operates under the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, which replaced NAFTA in 2020. The USMCA created what economists call an integrated North American market, where goods, particularly in manufacturing, cross borders multiple times during production. The energy sector provides a clear example. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, Canada supplied approximately 60% of U.S. crude oil imports in 2024. This isn't just any crude oil, it's heavy crude specifically, which U.S. Midwest refineries were designed to process. U.S. refineries, particularly in the Midwest, are configured for heavy crude from Canadian oil sands. Domestic U.S. production primarily yields light sweet crude from shale formations, which requires different refining processes. This creates what economists call complementary trade. Each country produces what the other needs. The automotive sector shows similar integration. A joint study by the Center for Automotive Research found that automotive components can cross the U.S.-Canada border up to 7 times during vehicle production. Engine blocks cast in Ontario might be machined in Michigan, integrated with transmissions in Canada, then assembled in the U.S. In early 2025, the United States implemented tariff changes affecting Canadian imports. These included tariffs on energy products, automotive components, steel, and aluminum. Let's examine the economic rationale and the immediate market responses. Trade economists generally identify several potential goals for tariff policies. First, protecting domestic industries from foreign competition. Second, generating government revenue. Third, encouraging reshoring of manufacturing. And fourth, creating negotiating leverage in trade discussions. However, tariffs also create predictable economic effects. According to basic trade economics, tariffs typically increase consumer prices, disrupt established supply chains, and often trigger retaliatory measures from trading partners. In the energy sector, tariffs on Canadian crude oil imports created immediate price pressures. The American Automobile Association reported gasoline price increases of 30 to 70 cents per gallon in Midwest states between March and June 2025. This occurred because refineries had limited ability to quickly substitute domestic light crude for Canadian heavy crude. U.S. refineries, particularly in the Midwest, are configured for heavy crude from Canadian oil sands. Domestic U.S. production primarily yields light sweet crude from shale formations, which requires different refining processes. This creates what economists call complementary trade. Each country produces what the other needs. The automotive sector shows similar integration. A joint study by the Center for Automotive Research found that automotive components can cross the U.S.-Canada border up to 7 times during vehicle production. Engine blocks cast in Ontario might be machined in Michigan, integrated with transmissions in Canada, then assembled in the U.S. In early 2025, the United States implemented tariff changes affecting Canadian imports. These included tariffs on energy products, automotive components, steel, and aluminum. Let's examine the economic rationale and the immediate market responses. Trade economists generally identify several potential goals for tariff policies. First, protecting domestic industries from foreign competition. Second, generating government revenue. Third, encouraging reshoring of manufacturing. And fourth, creating negotiating leverage in trade discussions. However, tariffs also create predictable economic effects. According to basic trade economics, tariffs typically increase consumer prices, disrupt established supply chains, and often trigger retaliatory measures from trading partners. In the energy sector, tariffs on Canadian crude oil imports created immediate price pressures. The American Automobile Association reported gasoline price increases of 30 to 70 cents per gallon in Midwest states between March and June 2025. This occurred because refineries had limited ability to quickly substitute domestic light crude for Canadian heavy crude. Goldman Sachs analysis estimated that a 10% tariff on crude oil imports could cost American households approximately $22 billion annually, or roughly $170 per household. These costs manifest as higher prices at gas pumps and increased transportation costs throughout the economy. The automotive industry experienced significant disruption. When tariffs were applied to automotive imports and components, manufacturers faced immediate challenges with their integrated production systems. Stellantis temporarily halted production at its Windsor, Ontario assembly plant. General Motors paused production of certain electric vehicle models. Ford announced potential price increases on vehicles produced after the tariff implementation. J.D. Power, which tracks automotive pricing, reported that average new vehicle prices reached $48,699 in April 2025, an increase of 2.5% in a single month. Analysts at Anderson Economic Group projected that vehicles directly affected by tariffs could see price increases ranging from $2,000 to $15,000, depending on the model and production location. Beyond automotive, economists documented broader price increases. Industrial goods prices increased 1.9% relative to trend by summer 2025. This affected appliances, electronics, and machinery, essentially any manufactured goods that relied on cross-border supply chains. Economic research consistently shows that tariff costs typically pass to consumers. Studies suggest that 60 to 80% of tariff costs appear in retail prices. This means American consumers, not foreign exporters, bear most of the economic burden. Canada's response to U.S. tariff policies followed predictable patterns from trade economics. According to the Government of Canada, retaliatory tariffs were implemented on $29.8 billion worth of U.S. goods, including $5.5 billion in agricultural products. The targeting was strategic. Canadian tariffs focused on products that could be sourced domestically or from alternative international suppliers, while targeting U.S. states with significant agricultural exports. The U.S. Department of Agriculture reported that agricultural exports to Canada declined by approximately $440 million between March and June 2025 compared to the same period in 2024. Affected products included beef, dairy, fruit, and pork. Simultaneously, Canada pursued trade diversification. In January 2026, Canada's government announced increased trade engagement with Asian markets, including China. This followed the completion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, which gave Canadian energy producers direct access to Pacific markets for the first time. From an economic perspective, this represents rational diversification. Trade theory suggests that countries seek to reduce dependence on single trading partners, especially when that relationship becomes unpredictable. Canada's strategy aligned with this principle.
Canada also announced adjustments to electric vehicle import policies, reducing tariffs on Chinese EVs to 6.1%, while setting an initial quota of 49,000 vehicles annually. This contrasted with U.S. tariffs of 100% on Chinese electric vehicles. Let's examine specific sector impacts to understand the broader economic picture. The agricultural sector experienced immediate effects from retaliatory tariffs. The American Farm Bureau Federation tracked tariff impacts across multiple markets. With Canada, China, and Mexico, the three largest agricultural export markets, all implementing retaliatory tariffs, American farmers faced reduced market access worth billions of dollars. Border communities experienced significant economic changes. Tourism data showed Canadian visits to U.S. border states declined 20 to 27% in 2025, depending on the state. This represented hundreds of thousands of fewer trips and millions in reduced economic activity. Nevada reported a 5 to 7% decline in Canadian tourism, affecting casino revenue, hotel bookings, and retail spending. States like Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Michigan, where economies depend significantly on Canadian cross-border commerce, reported similar impacts. The critical mineral sector presents interesting strategic considerations. Canada possesses significant reserves of lithium, cobalt, nickel, and rare earth elements, materials essential for batteries, semiconductors, and defense systems. Bilateral critical minerals trade between the U.S. and Canada totaled approximately $95.6 billion. With trade tensions increasing, questions arose about the security of these supply chains. If Canada diversifies its critical minerals exports towards Asian markets, it could affect U.S. defense and technology industries that depend on these materials.
The USMCA includes a mandatory review provision. On July 1, 2026, the 6th anniversary of implementation, the United States, Canada, and Mexico must conduct a joint review to determine whether to extend the agreement. If all three countries agree, the USMCA continues for another 16 years. If any country declines, the agreement enters annual reviews until potential termination in 2036. U.S. Trade Representative statements indicated that simply extending the existing agreement may not be the preferred option, suggesting potential renegotiation. Canada and Mexico have initiated their own consultation processes. From an economic perspective, uncertainty about the agreement's future creates challenges for businesses. Long-term investment decisions, supply chain planning, and market strategies all depend on knowing the trade policy framework. If the USMCA were to dissolve, trade would revert to World Trade Organization default tariff rates. This would represent a significant change from the integrated market that has developed over decades. First, deeply integrated supply chains cannot be quickly reconfigured. When automotive parts cross borders 7 times during production, any friction in that system creates costs throughout the chain. When refineries are built to process specific crude types, substitution isn't simple. Second, tariff costs primarily fall on domestic consumers, not foreign producers. Economic research and real-world price data consistently demonstrate this. When tariffs increase import costs, those costs appear in retail prices. Third, retaliatory tariffs are predictable responses in trade disputes. Trade partners rarely simply accept tariffs without responding, creating escalating economic costs on both sides. Fourth, trade diversification is a rational response to uncertainty. When trading relationships become unstable, countries seek alternative partners. This is basic risk management. The U.S.-Canada relationship demonstrates these principles in action. What began as tariff policy designed to achieve specific goals created cascading effects through energy markets, manufacturing supply chains, agricultural exports, and bilateral relations. Understanding these dynamics requires moving beyond political rhetoric to examine actual economic mechanisms, how markets respond to policy changes, how supply chains function, how costs transmit through the economy, and how countries adjust their strategies. If you found this economic analysis helpful, subscribe to NewsVault for more educational content on trade policy, international economics, and how global markets actually function. What aspects of trade economics interest you most? Should we analyze other bilateral trade relationships? Examine the economics of manufacturing reshoring? Explore energy market dynamics? Let me know in the comments. Check out our other videos on international trade, supply chain economics, and economic policy analysis. We break down complex economic topics with clear explanations and factual data. Thanks for watching NewsVault, where we explain economic and political systems through research and analysis. See you in the next one.